All right, at our household, we have a little bit of a tradition. Ever since our kids were young, we have Friday, well actually they're still young, we have Friday movie night. Every Friday, we put on a movie for the kids, and we're always in, and we have popcorn together after dinner, and the kids love it. And I'm not going to lie, so do I. I've kind of gotten into the whole popcorn thing. Like, I've been through 3 different iterations of popcorn poppers. I've researched the oils, and I've tried different ones of them, and I've tried different kernel types, and sizes, and brands, and I've really gotten this down to an art, and something that I kind of take pride in. Well, a few weeks ago, we were on vacation in Tennessee. 3 other families and us, we got a cabin together, 5-bedroom cabin. There were 9 kids between all the families together in this cabin. They had a blast. And the vacation spanned a weekend, so we got to share this family tradition, this Friday movie night, with all of our friends and our kids' friends. And so I was in the kitchen making popcorn while my wife and the other moms were upstairs getting the kids into their jammies, and we were getting the movie ready, and I'm making popcorn, and one of the other dads comes in and he says, all right, tell me the secret. What's so good about this popcorn? Well, he asked me, right? I get to tell him. So I started off, I told him about the popper that I use and other brands that I had used in the past. And then I told him about the oil. The oil is important. I like sunflower oil. You've got to have an oil that can withstand high heat. Then I talked about the types of popcorns that I've tried and the kind of popcorn we were going to have tonight and how it can hold more flavor in the flesh of it and how it holds the butter on it and the salt on it. And then I was telling them about the butter. You've got to add the butter at just the right time, because you don't want soggy popcorn or anything. And so just as I was showing him this tray that we use that draws hot air off of the popper in order to melt the butter so that it can drip on the popcorn all while it's being made, in walks another one of the dads. His name's Chang. And he could tell that we were deep in a meaningful conversation. And so he said, hey, what you guys talking about? And Chris turned to him and he was like, dude, I have no idea. I asked a simple question 10 minutes ago. Guy's been going on about butter for like 5 minutes. So you have to appreciate that when Roy Ballard invited me to speak tonight and on the state of farming and local food, starting with how we got to where we're at, I was excited. I sat down to put some notes to paper. I got through a whole page of notes and some ideas. I started with hunter-gatherers, right? And then I was up through the Enlightenment era, and then I was envisioning myself delivering this speech, and I was picturing all of y'all's faces in my head, and it looked about like Chris and Chang's face. So I thought maybe we could skip a few millennia. The theme for tonight is a farming carol. It's based off of Charles Dickens' book, where 3 ghosts visit Ebenezer Scrooge, the ghost of Christmas past, Christmas present, Christmas future. Well, we're going to have some visits this evening from the ghost of farming past, the ghost of farming present, and the ghost of farming future. That's the theme for the talk tonight. And as I was thinking about that, the ghost of Christmas past, when he visited Ebenezer Scrooge, he didn't take him back to like Stonehenge. Let's start here. He took him back to experiences within his own lifetime. And I think that's fitting for us as well. And the more I started to think about that, the more I started to realize that I myself am the ghost of farming past. I'm the ghost of farming past. Let me tell you why I say that. I am a 10-year 4-H member. I'm 32 years old. I spent my first 18 years on the family farm where my dad was born and raised, the farm that his dad had built, and he chose that place to build the farm because it was right around the corner from the farm where he was born and raised, where his grandfather had farmed. So for 18 years of my life, I woke up, I came into the kitchen, I looked out a window across a field at a house where my great-grandfather had farmed. But when I turned 18, and it was time for me to pick a vocation, pick a direction, what am I going to do with my life? To become the 5th generation Carter family farmer was not an option for me anymore. And so for a lot of reasons, and because there are so many other ex-farmers that share so much of the same story, I really look at this and say, I'm kind of the ghost of farming past. See, if the ghost of farming past took you on a little journey to my childhood like you did with Scrooge, you'd see that I spent most of the winters as a kid clearing fence rows, tearing out fence rows, ripping up fences, and cutting down the trees. And that's not just because our house was wood heated, although it was. It's because this was our way of joining this grand mission that we had as farmers to feed the world. Problem is the global markets for grain didn't work the way we needed them to in the early 80s. So luckily we were able to fall back on something Dad knew well. We would walk the grain off the farm on 4 hooves. We had, we already had some beef cattle on the farm at the time, but I'm pretty sure that's just because my dad was too lazy to mow the creek banks that were of non-arable land. We had a hog lot in the back of the farm, an old barn, hog lot, open lot. My brother and I were starting 4-H around that time. We started a dairy herd, actually. We went, instead of beef cattle, we went dairy. But then in the early 80s, our farm, my dad, was actually featured in the magazine Progressive Farmer. It came out into the story on how he had converted this pre-World War era barn that my grandfather had some very antique milking stanchions in. He converted it into a state-of-the-art 12-crate farrowing house swine operation. We leveled what used to be the feeding lot for the hogs, and we put up a fully automated state-of-the-art finishing barn. Behind it were the lagoons for the waste. Okay? And that was life for many years. I have a lot of memories of the assembly line out in the farrowing house. We'd go through 12 litters, hundreds of piglets, and we got it down pat. My brother, my dad, and I, we had this thing pretty licked. We would, the shot under the back legs, notch the ears, snip the tusks, snip the tail, a couple other snips, and then put them back into the crate. We had that down pat. Now, over time, farrow to finish kind of fell out of vogue. We sold the boars. We rented a larger finishing barn down the street, so we had 2 finishing barns we were running. All of that came to a crashing halt in 1997. Because suddenly it wasn't so clever anymore to feed $5 corn to 9-cent hogs. That's the same year my brother left the farm for college, never to return. 4 years later, I did the same. So yeah, I am the ghost of farming past. The average age of a farmer today is 57. So not only is the age of farmers increasing, but also according to USDA research, the debt-to-asset ratio of farms are increasing. Currently, the average service life of farm debt is 20 years. So what those numbers mean is if the average farmer stopped accruing any new debt today and instead started eliminating debt over time, they'd be 77 years old by the time they had their mortgage and their debts paid off. So that's kind of a downer way to start us off tonight. My bad. I'm sorry. But I wanted to share a quote from the Charles Dickens book that inspired this talk. When Scrooge was on this trip with the ghost of Christmas past, and he said, no, show me no more, I can't take it anymore. That spirit said this to him: these are the shadows of the things that have been. They are what they are. Don't blame me. These are the shadows. This is where we are today. We have an increasing average age of farmers. We have fewer farmers. But most of all, we are struggling to retain farmers into the vocation. But the next spirit that visited Scrooge, he took him around and he showed him around the community those shadows, the ramifications in the present day of the past. And they still exist. But the other thing he showed him is this inexplicable optimism that he found in people like Cratchit and Tim, and in the people that had come to his door to collect funds and alms. This inexplicable optimism that tells us that it doesn't matter, that we can look around and see those shadows still existing. We can see that we live in the product of the past, but the past does not define our future. And that's the important thing that we've always got to keep in front of us. We can start with just, my family farm again. If we were whisked away from here like Scrooge was and we traveled to Howard County, you'd see Dad still grows corn and soybeans on 80 acres. He's a grain farmer, that's just it. The once revolutionary farrowing house, the west wall's about to cave in on it. There's no paint left on the barn. The roof is in disrepair. Still too lazy to mow that creek bank, though, so he's got some cattle still on the farm. And about 5 years ago, he started selling, well, maybe a little more than 5 years ago, he started selling a few of those cattle instead of just hauling them to the sale barn. Some friends and family said they wanted to buy some freezer beef, so he sold it right to them. Well, people at his work, by the way, Dad is now, he works nights at a factory in Lafayette. That's where the income comes from, because there's not farm income off of 80 acres anymore. People in the break room found out that he was doing this. Word spread. 5 head of cattle, freezer beef, turns into 10, turns into 20. Now, Dad sells 20 cattle a year. This year, I think he's got 18 head of cattle. Every one of them is going to go direct to a consumer. It's not going to go to a sale barn. Chicago Board of Trade's got no impact on what the price is that he can command from these customers. It tastes good. That's what they're paying for. I don't even think his customers know what fat cattle prices are or how to find them. That's kind of not the point. So this year, he'll do about $40,000 in direct sales freezer beef. Then this year, the next thing that he did was he had to fence in more acreage that had been in row crops in order to have more grass. And then what he put on that acreage was, instead of just cattle, he put out 200 Cornish cross hens. Sorry, not hens, cockerels. He put out chickens. And the chickens, of course, they're eating grain, but they also scrape up the cow pies. They're going to find larvae underneath. They get a decent amount of their proteins from that. And he wasn't sure if anyone would buy them, but he told some of the people that are already buying freezer beef from him that he was doing this. All 200 were sold before he could have them processed. He's going to have to buy more next year because one of his coworkers said, well, you've ruined it now. I can't buy chicken at the store anymore. That stuff tastes like cotton balls compared to this. As for my own story, about 3 years ago, I decided to get back into ag in some small way myself. And so myself and Chris Baggett and Adam Moody, 3 co-founders, we started a company here you guys maybe have heard of. It's called Husk. And the mission of Husk was to add value to our raw agricultural products here in Indiana. We buy Indiana-grown vegetables, we process and freeze them, and we put them into grocery stores. And so we started that 3 years ago, and just in under 2 years, we had our products in about 300 stores, which is pretty much unheard of. And as we set out to meet the farmers who would supply us with this, Roy was one of my first calls. And Roy introduced me to farmers around the area who would be able to supply us with vegetables, because I didn't know any farmers that grew vegetables like that. And that's when I found a really unique experience in meeting those farmers. Because I met farmers like Jeremy Weaver, Steve Souter, Scott Wilson. And the funny thing is, these farmers are my peers. They're my counterparts. And those shadows of things that are, like I said, the ghost of farming past would show us, they've got the same shadows in their backgrounds. Their stories could be, and they're not exactly the same, but they're very similar to mine, with one crucial difference. These guys are still farming, which really inspired me. These guys, Jeremy Weaver, he farms about 1,700 acres with his father-in-law. And then on the side, see, when you come of age and you need to make your own income and it's time to support yourself and your family, it's not like you can go, well, Dad, where's my 1,700 acres? So he carved off 50 and he put produce on it and he started selling specialty crops. His income is about equal that he makes between his 50 acres of specialty crops and his 1,700 acres of row crops. Scott Wilson's got a similar story. He's north on 31. If you've driven up toward Kokomo, you pass the Wilson Farm Market. What you may not know, though, is that the Wilson family farms also farms 3,000 acres of grain. Scott farms 100 acres of specialty crops that he sells to Husk, farmers markets, and at his own store. And on that, he makes a comparable income to what his dad and brother make on the 3,000 acres of grain. See, if I am the ghost of farming past, these gentlemen are the ghost of the farming future. And that's what I've come to be convinced of. In those first 10 years that I did spend off the farm, though, I learned to become a software engineer. I started creating software. Where we're going next with Husk is we're expanding beyond just freezing and processing, and we're creating technology. We're using the skills that I learned in those 10 years off farm. We're going to create technology that'll allow these farmers to market their products directly to consumers in a better way. Our mission now is to create more and more markets for food produced right here. More and more ways for consumers to get access to farmers, to get access to the food that's out there, to find ways to buy local food, but also more and more ways for farmers to get in touch with the consumers that can buy their food. Because our mission is to help those farmers regain the margins that have been lost through an 80-year process of specialization and reduction. Because in reality, that is the shadow that we live in. If we're talking about the shadows of things that are, it's an 80-year-long process of specialization that reduces farms from an 80-acre, multi-diverse ecosystem where not only grain, but also proteins and animal husbandry and all take place on the farm. It reduced that farm to today what it has mainly become. Our family farm is an 80-acre grain production that ships off its product down the street to another cog in the industrial wheel that's going to turn that grain into meat and proteins. Now, that is an incredibly efficient system. I have to pause and mention this. It's an industrially savvy system. It learns a lot of lessons from Henry Ford, and it's incredibly efficient. And I say that because of this. It would be foolish, I mentioned a lot of my generation, my peers, these guys that are my age. It would be foolish for us, like some rebellious teenager, to think we know better and to completely throw everything from the last 80 years out the window. There's been a lot of that sentiment in the local food movement, and I don't necessarily share that, because I will say this. I don't think that industrial farming is the problem. As I've thought about this more and more over the last couple of years, I've become convinced that if the ghost of farming present pulled us out of where we are and allowed us to analyze where we're at as an outside observer, the problems that he would show us aren't any one production model over another. It's not conventional farming versus, or industrial farming versus specialty crops, or commodity crops versus specialty crops. It's not non-GMO versus spray-free. It's not free-range versus confinement. That's not the issues. It's not even a matter of certification of one kind or the other, like organic versus conventional farming. And we've got to stop arguing as though the merits of one of those kinds of farming versus another, because it's not really the point. The problem that we face in the present, the shadow of the things that have been, that I've been talking about, as Dickens put it, is that the ways that we both consume and produce, it's on both ends of this supply chain, that we both consume and produce food, are dehumanizing. They're dehumanizing. The process of food and farming treats the people within it as less than human. Let me share a couple of examples why I say that. Let's start with the process of consuming food. It is a dehumanizing experience for a mom to walk up and down the aisles of what amounts to be a warehouse with lipstick on it, reading a tiny box on the side of a package in 8-point Arial font that tells you the chemical makeup of the products inside this package so that you can decide whether or not to feed this to your children. That's dehumanizing, because you are more than the proper makeup of carbohydrates, proteins, vitamins, and minerals. You are more than that. And now likewise, it's dehumanizing for the farmer whose job may have been reduced to depositing what amounts to be an automated mining system that's semi-robotic as it sends its drills into the soil to extract minerals, carbohydrates, proteins, and encapsulate it in a nice, easy-to-transport product that we can then send to a factory and reconstitute into something that mother might recognize as food. Now, I use the word dehumanizing simply because of this. It's not a matter of what we eat or this corn or even GMO. Okay, it's a slightly lab-engineered mining tool, but that's okay. It's dehumanizing because what relationship does that farmer have to the mother who eats the nutrients that he produced? None. None. And you know the first thing that erodes in a dehumanizing system is trust. When we treat each other or think of each other in ways that are less than human, the first thing that goes away is trust, trustworthiness, and relationship. I want to share a little lesson about trust. It comes from the Bible. See, in Jesus' day, it had become very, very customary to swear oaths anytime you wanted someone to really believe what you were saying. Okay? And, I mean, we do this today as well. Like, I swear on my grandma's bones, right? Or I'll swear on a stack of Bibles. Now, the idea is, my word may not be enough, but if I swear on something big enough, then you could really believe what I said. Well, the Pharisees had a little bit of a moral issue with this. The Pharisees were the religious elite. They were kind of the keepers of religiosity. And they said, well, this is a moral dilemma. Not because of the trustworthiness or anything like that, but because of reverence. See, people were swearing on the temple, and they said, whoa, 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 whoa. The temple's holy. You can't swear on the temple. Come on, guys, you can't do that. That's irreverent. Instead, swear on the gold in the temple. Oh, right, that's better. That's the way to do this. So Jesus comes along, and he's like, Wait. What is wrong with you people? You're missing the whole point. And so his teaching was, do not swear on any of these things. Instead, anybody remember what he said? Let your yes be yes and your no be no. If the ghost of farming present took us and extricated us from our situation to where we could observe as outside observers, do you think we would observe a food system marked by trust? Do consumers trust where their food comes from? Do farmers trust the markets they have for their livestock and their grain? Less and less so. And so I think if Jesus were here today and the food Pharisees, you can inject whatever face you want into that title. I kind of like the word. I think food Pharisee describes a lot of people we've experienced before. But if the food Pharisees come and they say, hey, which certification matters? What oath can we trust? Is it all natural or does it have to be certified organic? Is free range enough or does it have to be pasture raised? What are some other ones? Is it can we have grass fed or does it need to be completely grass finished? Which do I swear by? Can I swear by the temple or by the gold in the temple? Should I swear by the USDA or by the GFSI or by the World Health Organization? What can we trust, Jesus? I think his words would be very similar. I think he would walk down the aisles of a Whole Foods and read all the labels and signs and stars and stickers and insignias and certifications, and he would say, let your food be food. Let meat be meat. Let apples be apples. Let eggs be eggs. Listen, if the only way that you can get a consumer to trust this carton of a dozen eggs is by insignia and certification and stamp on top of stamp, labeled all over the outside of it, if it's by swearing oaths, is that the only way that you can get somebody to believe that by eating these eggs they're going to not die? Maybe certification's not your biggest problem right now. Ever since we started Husk, one of the things I've said again and again and again to our consumers is they come to us and they'll ask questions. Are you certified organic? Do you use GMO products? Do you use this chemical? Do you use that chemical? I always tell them, regulation is a poor substitute for transparency. Ask the farmer. And we provide that technology, that transparency that allows the consumer to know exactly who grew, not in what state or not in what county, but who is it that grew that corn that's inside that bag that you're about to eat tonight. If you want to know how they grew it, ask them. As we go on a short trip with the Ghost of Farming Future, that's what he's going to show us, is that our future in farming is going to be built on technology like this, but not necessarily technology in the sense of hybrids or seed chemical combos or animal growth. It's going to be the democratizing technology that puts information about food into the hands of consumers and empowers them to eat in a way that they choose to. It's going to be technology that allows consumers and farmers to directly connect in such a way that builds trust. Because when a farmer can connect with the consumer, that's the only way that they can build value in the products of their farm. And that's the mission we've got with farmersmarket.com, the direction we're going. Those are some of the things that technology such as online markets like the Hoosier Harvest Market that Roy and the Extension Office got going here in Hancock County, where consumers can buy directly from the farmers. That technology is adding value to farms, allowing farms to regain profit margin in their farms. Okay? And the winds of this change are already starting to blow because at the biggest levels, if you guys have been watching the news, McDonald's, I mean the icon of a dehumanizing food process, of an industrial process that produces massive amounts of cheap food in unprecedented quantities. The chinks in their armor are starting to show. Their sales are starting to decline. Walmart last quarter posted negative sales trends. Okay? Walmart, the epitome of a dehumanizing food consumer process and production process going into it, their sales are declining, and they're worse yet for the investors and for their stock price. Their forecasts show they have no answer for it. Now, for every $1 billion that Walmart loses or McDonald's loses in consumer food dollars, where do those go? Did they go to their big competitors? Did Kroger and Meijer gobble up these dollars? Is that where it shifted? No. They fragmented. They decentralized. That $1 billion went to 1 million different places. That means it went to regional grocery systems. It went to local independent markets. And even in an increasingly more and more pattern, it's going directly to the farmers through CSAs and farmers markets. Now, I mean, let's just talk about traditional grocery for a second, though. Let's leave CSAs and farmers markets out of it because there's a lot of people who want to count those as insignificant. They're not, but that's fine. Let's talk about grocery, the very industry and the very place where Walmart is competing. In the traditional grocery industry, do you know what the number one growing category is in any department? It's not organic. It's not gluten-free. It's not fair trade. It's local. Market research from Nielsen and other organizations has been showing over the past several years this trend that the number one decision-making influencer for consumers at point of sale do I buy this apple or this apple, is not the certifications or the stickers or the claims made. It's the trust that the consumer can feel by knowing where that food came from. That's what helps them make the decision more and more and more. That's the reason why at Husk, when we came out in the market 2 years ago and we went to stores and we had something that nobody else could offer. Here's a bag of frozen corn. Here is the farmer that grew it. 300 stores in 2 years. Nobody does that in the grocery industry. I didn't know that. I found out later that that was kind of unheard of. I thought this was normal. It's like everything should be this easy. The reason is because if we were offering source identification, that's the very thing that they knew they had to try and find, and they were struggling to find it. Grocers are clamoring to find more and more local products, and that's what we've been doing at Husk. Urban Ladle that you had tonight. We talked about several of the products back at our table. Amber Waves, Brooks Naturals, these are all local products that when we go to the grocery stores and we say we've got more local products, they say, tell me more. We need these. And they're adding them to the shelves in droves. Okay? Because they need to be able to tell their consumers that they know where their food is coming from, because that's what the consumers are asking for. As we set out to supply those 300 stores, that required the production of just about 100 acres of specialty crops from farmers like Jeremy Weaver and Scott Wilson I mentioned earlier. On which, on those 100 acres, those farmers averaged over $800 an acre in gross margin. Okay? And that's accounting for the fact that specialty crops have a higher input cost in pest control and definitely in labor. That's accounting for that fact. They made over $800 an acre in gross margin. And it's not just because they're growing specialty crops, though. Okay, you got to understand. There's a commodity index price for specialty crops, too, just like there are for yellow number 2 corn. Our farmers that were supplying Husk were able to command nearly double the USDA commodity index price because our consumers from Husk were willing to pay a premium to know where their food came from. They were willing to pay a premium for that trust, for that confidence in what they wanted. And so I'll never forget this. This was a great testimony when I told Jeremy Weaver, when I showed him how this was working. He was one of our first farmers. And he said, wait. So the consumers are going to be able to know my name when they get this bag. Yeah. All right, well, then I can't cut any corners. Exactly. That is a humanizing food system. That's a humanizing food system. The bottom line is this, though. You cannot be responsible in that same way to 9 billion people. Trust doesn't factor into feeding the world. It can't. It doesn't work that way. But the future of agriculture is going to be the decentralization of our food complex, the democratization of food where localized communities are responsible for how their land, how their natural resources are cultivated, and how they add value to that raw agricultural product in such a way that the people that are consuming the product are the ones are tied to the land. What we're talking about is a reintegration of farms and the communities where they serve. Or an integration that's built on relationships, not necessarily on just a legal right to farm, but on a community saying, please come here and farm like that. That's the future of farming as I see it. Now here's the part that everyone in the room and the farming community really needs to hear me say, and I mean everyone, big and small. Is there room for that grain farmer in this local food movement? That's a question, right? I mean, is there room for the industrial farm pursuing using technologies 200, 220, 250 bushels of the acre with a 24-row planter and 12-row corn heads and auger carts and semis full of grain? Is there room for that farmer in this local food movement? Absolutely. Heck yeah. We need grain, but I just want you to imagine this. Is anybody in the room a grain farmer? Any corn, soybean farms? Okay, imagine what it does to the profitability of the farm if you're surrounded here in this east central Indiana, if you're surrounded by not just a grain elevator, but cattle herders, pork producers, chicken barns, both layers and egg producers, all of which are held accountable by their customers to a higher standard of food because their consumers now are demanding, through technology, through the democratizing power of technology, they want to know where their food came from all the way up the chain. How was the grain produced? What kind of inputs went into this? And they're asking those kinds of questions, and they're being held accountable to that, and so they're going to hold you accountable to that. And suddenly there are multiple buyers. What does multiple buyers do to the price of any item? Think about that. Just imagine what would happen if there were so many consumers around you for the grain that came off of the farm, what the impact that would have for profitability of grain farming. What if Cargill and ADM had to vie for the right to buy the product of your fields? This is not a fairy tale. This is not wishful thinking. And I know that for some people it's, well, that may not be where farming is headed. As long as we all think that way, you're exactly right. But here's what I'm convinced of. As far as the future of farming, what I'm describing is is the only kind of farming that has a future. This is the kind of farming that I believe very passionately has a future for our generations, for the generations to come. It's the kind of farming that will last for future generations, and this is very important. This is why we're here. It's up to us to create it. It's up to us to create it. When I was 18 years old, I did not have the option to be a farmer. My son's 3. I've got 15 years. I know I can't chart his future. I'm not naive. I'm not ignorant. I don't want to try and make him a farmer. That's not my goal. But I'm not okay with the idea that the one profession that I hold in highest regard is the one profession that my children don't have the option to enter into. I'm not okay with that. And so, my legacy will be the contribution that I make to creating this kind of farming community. My legacy, I hope, will be in creating farming that my kids, your kids, our grandkids can experience more than once a year at a state fair or at a museum. That's the legacy I want to leave. How about you? Here's to the future.